Welcome, everybody, to the award-winning RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Edge Boost and RotoWire's free trial. RotoWire.com/pod for a free look behind our paywall. It is Friday, February 7th, 2025, the day after the trade deadline. Alex Barutha here with Shannon McEwen, Ken K-Train Kreitz. Not here today. He worked so hard around the trade deadline. He just had to take today off. So I want to, for people watching live, I do want to put a reminder. We will answer your questions in the chat. So drop those in as soon as possible, because we're going to talk some trades, but then we'd like to get into waiver wire and answer some of your questions before that. Obviously, some of the biggest trades that happened. I don't want to recap them all, but it sounds like Anthony Davis will debut for the Mavericks on Saturday. Luka is supposed to debut for the Lakers on Monday. Jimmy Butler is supposed to debut on Saturday. Brandon Ingram is still hurt. But we did have some debuts. Shannon, we had De'Aaron Fox debut. Nice game against the Atlanta Hawks. And we had Zach LaVine have 2 games in a row. They had a back-to-back, the Kings against the Magic, which they gave up 130 to the Magic, lost that game, and then lost the following game against the Portland Trailblazers. Fox had a great game. LaVine, not so much, Shannon.
Yeah, that Fox game is super encouraging. If you roster Fox already in fantasy, to see him basically not miss to be or have one of his best of the season in that debut with the Spurs. Was fantastic. 13 assists is absolutely insane. The fallout, as his arrival and how that impacted his teammates and their fantasy value as well. No one took a big ding. Chris Paul still played 30 minutes. You've got Vassell out there. You've got Castle. Castle's probably the guy who's going to take the biggest ding, and he did in game 1, only playing 20 minutes. But very encouraging if you roster Fox, seeing him perform like that in his debut with San Antonio. For LaVine, I roster LaVine on a couple of my most important teams, and I am a little bit worried. I mean, he's going to go from essentially being the number 1 or number 2 option for the Bulls on any given night to possibly dropping down to 3 or 4 with the Kings. They have so many other pieces and other people that are going to need the ball that it's hard to see LaVine keeping his value as high as it was in Chicago. Still going to be solid, shot poorly those first two games. So I wouldn't panic yet, but he is going to take a little bit of a ding being in Sacramento now.
Yeah, Fox was really aggressive in that debut. I think the main thing that stood out to me was just they were getting up and down the court. Like, Fox is leading the fast break. That's something that the Spurs haven't done as well this year. And then LaVine, yeah, exactly like you said. They're so offensive heavy. They're so heavy with playmakers that I think LaVine has to settle in. But if his assists decrease and his points decrease, I wouldn't be surprised. We'll see. I mean, don't do anything drastic. Like, do not drop Zach LaVine. But you're gonna have to wait and see what happens here. I think somehow we also have Chris Middleton, Marcus Smart, and Malcolm Brogdon all still on the Wizards. Also, the Nets basically did nothing at the deadline. I mean, some of what happened at the deadline is what didn't happen, right? Nets didn't really move anybody. Utah really didn't move anybody. Like, Sexton's still there, Jordan Clarkson's still there, John Collins is still there. So some of the stashes we had prepared for those situations may still work out if those teams decide to rest, but other stuff is a little more murky. We also had, just talking about last night, Shannon, we had big games from Joker, Anthony Edwards, and LeBron James.
Yeah, absolutely big, just gigantic games from 3 studs, which should be is pretty much the norm with these guys, right? But I just wanted to call it out. LeBron drops a season high 42 points, his first 40-point game of the season. 42, 17 boards, 8 assists, 1 block, 1 steal in 38 minutes in a win over the Warriors. Anthony Edwards crossed the 40-point mark for the second consecutive game, 41, 7, and 6 in a win over the Rockets. He really took over the final 5-6 minutes as well and was just dominant. And then Joker doing what he does. 61 fantasy points, 28 real points, 10 rebounds, 12 assists, 2 steals in only 31 minutes. That was a close game for the much of the first half, but the Nuggets really jumped out in the third quarter and took over that game with Jokic in particular. Just a blast to watch, man. It's truly unbelievable watching that guy. I tuned into that game and the Minnesota Rockets game last night, and both were very fun.
Orlando is pretty bad on the road, and they are missing Jalen Suggs. That's maybe even the bigger story is how bad Orlando is playing. But Minnesota, I feel like Minnesota has quietly figured it out. So since January 6th, they are 12-6, second best net rating in the NBA during that stretch. While Anthony Edwards is averaging 31 points a game on 45% shooting, getting to the free throw line 9 times a game and taking 10 threes a game. Some James Harden stuff going on there. Also with 6 assists, 6 rebounds, and about 2 stocks. So Edwards is playing the best basketball of his life. The Timberwolves are flying, and they're missing DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. So they're getting a lot of defensive contributions out of other guys.
That might be why they're playing well. Naz Reid has been great since joining the starting lineup, and Jaden McDaniels has really hit another level in the last few weeks, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago. But those two guys in particular have been great.
It's in some other smaller news. Ben Simmons is working towards a buyout with the Brooklyn Nets. He is meeting today with the LA Clippers, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Houston Rockets. So we'll see what happens with those teams. Maybe he'll meet with other teams. But I think if you're rostering Ben Simmons in fantasy, probably just hang on, see what happens. If there's a good drop, if there's someone on the waiver wire that's really good available, don't hesitate to drop him. But I think I'm fine holding him. And then we also got some news. Elfrid Payton is back, Shannon. He is signing a 10-day contract with the Charlotte Hornets. I will ask you maybe an unanswerable question, but point blank, is it happening again?
I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think so. No, I do not think Elfrid Payton is happening again. I mean, it really just depends on LaMelo Ball being active or not, right? LaMelo is currently questionable for Friday night's game, which is super encouraging if you roster LaMelo, because who knows how long he would actually, anytime he suffers an injury, who knows how long he's truly going to sit, especially with the Hornets and how they update their players' medical status. It's always super frustrating. But it's if LaMelo comes back, Elfrid Payton won't be a thing. If LaMelo's out, they have no other point guards. So Payton could actually be a very surprising option. If you're in a deep enough league to stash a player of Payton's ilk, then certainly consider it. But it has to come with an extended LaMelo absence for me to truly get excited.
Yeah, the Hornets, they traded Micic to the Phoenix Suns, getting Nurkic back in that deal. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We do have some questions in the chat. Keep those coming. They are good. We got a question from Kobe who is asking about Nurkic or Gafford rest of season. I understand the argument for both of these guys, given the situation, but what do you think, Shannon?
Well, the Mavs have already come out and said Anthony Davis is playing power forward. We know Derek Lively's out until our estimated return date for him is April 2nd. So basically, he's done. If you roster Derek Lively, you should drop him. There's no reason to hold him for the final 3 or 4 games of the regular season. And with Davis playing the 4, that leaves the 5 to Gafford. And I don't believe in Nurkic. I don't believe Nurkic is guaranteed an expansive role with the Hornets. I know that they don't have much else at the 5 spot, but I just don't believe in Nurkic anymore. I think he's washed. I don't think he's a good teammate. And we'll talk more about some other options at center for the Hornets later in the show. But right now it's Gafford, and I think it's a no-brainer, Gafford. Like 9 out of 10 times you're picking Gafford, and that's the right call.
Yeah, I would rather have Gafford. Also, they're trying to win. Hornets right now are basically at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Nurkic is 30 years old, something like that. So no reason to necessarily play him. Are Chris Paul, Jeremy Grant, and Nick Claxton worth holding on to for the rest of the season? Well, let's give you some Chris Paul stats right now. In De'Aaron Fox's first game, Chris Paul still started, still played 30 minutes, put up 11 points, 9 assists, 4 rebounds. So I mean, my gut reaction on that is yes. I mean, what we saw was Harrison Barnes only played 23 minutes in that game against Atlanta. Stephon Castle only played 20 minutes in that game, and Keldon Johnson was down to 15. So honestly, I think you're good on Paul. Do you have any strong leans on these other two guys, Jeremy Grant and Nick Claxton, Shannon?
Yeah, I agree with you on Paul. And like I said in the opening segment about De'Aaron Fox, Paul still played 30 minutes. That's super encouraging. He held value last year, playing under 27 minutes per game for the Warriors. He's been at 29 minutes per game for the Spurs this year. So the fact that he still played 30 minutes in Fox's debut is super encouraging, that he'll be able to retain value moving forward. Claxton, it's tough. He's had a very disappointing season. It's certainly surprising to see him play 26 minutes per game after being pushing 30 minutes the past couple of years, but he's still locked in that starting role. He's still getting enough blocks. He had a big 6-block game last week. It's even if you look at just the last handful of games, you've got the stats are too good for me to warrant dropping Claxton unless it's a very shallow league. 10.8 points, 6 rebounds, 2.4 blocks per game over the past 5. So to me, that's still value. That still means you have to roster Claxton in most formats. Even Jeremy Grant, he's had some extended stretches because of injury, or maybe the Portland Trailblazers just didn't know if he was going to be a part of the future. But the Trailblazers are rolling right now. They've won like 5 or 6 straight.
6.
Grant, yeah, they really are. It's 6 straight. Grant started every game he's appeared in since returning from injury in mid-January. He played 37 minutes last night against the Kings. He had 12 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 3 blocks. The defense was really where it's at. I mean, he was playing really great defense on DeMar DeRozan. But the fact that they didn't trade Grant means he's there, and he's going to continue to get those minutes. So is he the Grant that we saw with peak value earlier in his Portland career, or when he had that 1-year stop in Detroit? No, he's not going to be scoring 22 points per game. But is he a 15 and 3 guy with, 1.8, 1.9 stocks? Yeah. And I think that, again, that holds value in many leagues. So for all 3 of those guys, I'm holding right now. And anything from, mid-sized to deep 10-teamers and deeper than that.
I've been cleaning up on the Trailblazers spreads in our best bets column. So it's actually hilarious how well they're playing lately. We got Max Christie question. Max Christie goes to Dallas in this AD trade, and in his debut went perfect from 3. Had 15 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 4 from 3. But then against Boston last night, goes 0 of 3 from 3, but still 15 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists. Yeah, I mean, he's stepping into this kind of Quentin Grimes role, and the Mavericks have been playing some guys who just are not, like Jagan Hardy had been getting minutes, and I just don't think you need as much from like Najee Marshall potentially. And what are you really getting out of like Kessler Edwards? So I'm kind of beating around this, but it seems like Christie is in a pretty good position right now in Dallas.
He is in a solid position. I do think we're seeing a bit of smoke and mirrors with his first 2 games. I mean, back-to-back 31-point fantasy outings. We're not going to see that on a regular basis from Christie. Right. I think he's going to be most comparable, especially once Dallas is closer to full strength. PJ Washington sat out that game. Anthony Davis hasn't played yet. once this team gets those two pieces back, I find it hard to believe that Max Christie will continue to put up 30-point fantasy games. We're going to see him, hover around 20 points, kind of like he did with the Lakers while he was starting.
Yeah, he's not going to continue shooting 52% from the field. But yeah, I mean, I think if you had been holding him, you still hold him. I would not necessarily go rush to pick him up.
Agreed.
Well, we had Quentin Grimes end up in Philadelphia, also kind of a similar, similar type player, but now he goes into a Philly situation where they have been dealing with injuries all year. Their bench has been horrible, and now you have Quentin Grimes pop in. He's had an okay season. I think it depends on how you want to frame it. But do you think this is a real boost to Grimes' value going to Philadelphia at all?
Not necessarily boost. I think it's going to be similar to Christie, where he's essentially playing the exact same role that he had in Dallas, right? He might see a few spot starts here and there when Paul George sits, but he's kind of that sixth, seventh man for the team. I don't expect him to perform better in Philly than he did in Dallas. Maybe a more consistent role, like he'll get that 25 to 28 minutes every game instead of those odd games where Jason Kidd just didn't feel like giving him extra run. But not necessarily an increase in fantasy value. I would not project that.
Let's answer just a couple more here. We got one trade question. Who would you rather have, Shannon? Mark Williams or Andrew Wiggins rest of season? 16-team cat league.
Interesting. It's Mark Williams by a significant edge for me. Obviously, being in Los Angeles with Luka and LeBron and Austin Reeves, Mark Williams is not going to be asked to score as much as he was in Charlotte, which was a pleasant surprise that he was scoring as much in Charlotte. But he's going to be a great source of rebounds, great source of blocks, still get you quality enough points, high enough shooting, a great field goal percentage. Wiggins, I don't think Wiggins sees an increase in value in Miami. Miami has Hero, they have Ware, they have Adebayo. You have guys like Jaquez as well. There are numerous pieces in Miami that do very similar production, offer similar, not necessarily similar skill sets. I do think Wiggins is quite a bit more athletic than a lot of the guys on Miami's roster, but similar production at the very least. And I think it's going to be hard for Wiggins to really pop off and be more valuable than he was in Golden State.
We'll do one more question. I will say, there are people asking great questions in chat. We are about to move on to waiver wire soon, where we do have some of the names that you guys are asking about. So I don't want to, I don't want to step on our own toes when it comes to that. So we hear about those guys in a sec. But Don Sicario, he wants to activate Paul George in his category league, but he needs to drop one of these three players, Shannon. Nikola Jovic, Matas Buzelis, or Isaiah Collier.
It's Novich for me, and it's because of that addition of Wiggins. I was very high on Novich before Wiggins landed in Miami, but that's probably the player who I think will lose the most minutes with Wiggins coming over. Jaquez as well, but it's going to be tough for Novich to really carve out 28, 30 minutes per game, even coming off the bench. And he's been great off the bench for Miami the last couple of weeks. But Novich is the guy. It's primarily one, because Wiggins is there, and two, I'm really high on those other guys the rest of the season.
All right, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of this video, which is the waiver wire. We have a short week coming up, Shannon, because of the All-Star break, which starts next Friday. So 8 teams play 3 times, and then everybody else plays twice. I'm going to kick things off right away. Actually, first thing, If you appreciate our videos, if you like our content, RotoWire.com/pod. You get a free look behind our paywall. We have tons of great, not only just basketball tools, but you'll get, free look behind the paywall for all sports. Obviously, we have the Super Bowl coming up. We have best bets articles and the RotoWire picks and props app. So if you got an iPhone, you got an Android, just go into your app store, RotoWire, type that in, and you will see the picks and props app. Great stuff there. I'm going to kick things off, Shannon, with someone who is one of many point guards on the Chicago Bulls, and that is Ayo Dosunmu, 36% rostered. Just a hilarious roster for Chicago at this point. It's basically a bunch of point guards and Nikola Vucevic. I really don't know how this is going to work. Maybe Vucevic gets set. He didn't get traded, obviously, but Dosunmu, I think, is going to play a lot down the stretch. Past 6 games for him, he's played 33 minutes a game, 13.5 points, 5.3 assists, 2.5 rebounds, 1.9 stocks. Sort of indirectly affected by the trade deadline, but obviously the Bulls moved Zach LaVine. I think someone's certainly just a little bit under rostered right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even, whether he's coming off the bench or starting, he has started 6 games in a row. He's held pretty good value this year, and just definitely a guy who's been much better this season than I expected. My first waiver wire suggestion of the week is Dosunmu's teammate and newly minted starting power forward for the Chicago Bulls, Matis Buzelis, 24% rostered on Yahoo as of last night, 7% rostered on ESPN. Tons of pedigree with Buzelis, selected 11th overall by the Bulls in the 2024 NBA draft. He was expected to go top 10. I know I was bummed. I thought the Pistons were looking at him with the 5 pick. Love me some Ron Holland, but Buzelis is a different kind of player. Legit size, 6'10", 210-ish range, and solid all-around skills, very athletic. He's going to be in the dunk contest, so you guys will see some of that. He's been limited to mostly garbage time during the first half of the season, but Buzelis started to flash his upside in recent weeks, which included a 24-point game against the Heat this week. Following the Zach LaVine trade, Buzelis has been promoted to the starting lineup, as mentioned, and I fully expect he'll keep that role for the remainder of the season. It would be very odd if the Bulls put him in there for just a short, 1-game spot start. Buzelis has averaged 15.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 2 threes, and 2 blocks per game over the past week, which is good enough to be a top 60 fantasy player over that stretch. Little bit of a hot streak from the floor in that 2-game sample size, but there's going to be plenty of scoring. There's going to be 3-pointers, and I really like his upside on the defensive end. He can get some steals, but blocks, even in the 15 minutes per game he's been playing this year, he averaged close to 1 block per game. So he could be a sneaky source of blocks down the stretch as well.
Yeah, we usually talk about these 3-point shooter shot blocker combination guys as centers, Miles Turner, Brook Lopez. But Buzelis has an opportunity to be like a 3-point shot block guy at the forward position. And yeah, he's shown a lot of upside lately. So that's someone certainly worth picking up. My last guy before I get to the sort of trade deadline affected guys is Andrew Nembhard, who has just been under rostered lately, probably for the whole season since he came back, but especially the past 12 games. Nembhard, who is 36% rostered on Yahoo, averaging 12 points a game on 49% shooting from the field, 5.5 assists, 3.8 rebounds, and 2.1 steals, has been really, really consistent on the steals category. And if you're in a 9-cat league, just 1.8 turnovers. If you're in a fantasy points league, 29 fantasy points per game over the past 12. So basically, he's very rosterable in all leagues, and I think has just been underrated lately.
Yeah, totally agree with Nembhard there. My second, in similar vein, I'm going to hold off on guys impacted by the trade deadline to my last 2 selections. Here's a guy we've been discussing for, it feels like a couple months now. Keon Johnson, guard for the Brooklyn Nets, 22% rostered on Yahoo, 7% on ESPN. That's supremely under rostered. given his recent production and his role going forward. Over the past week, Johnson's been a top 40 player on a per game basis. He's averaged 20 points, 6.3 boards, 3.3 assists, 3 3-pointers, and 1.3 steals per game in 32 minutes per over the past 4 contests. The Nets didn't make really any big moves. They didn't do a big fire sale. Both Cams are still on the team. So that was quite surprising. But, the one guy that remained, Keon Johnson, he's locked into that role. We'll have to see what happens when Cam Thomas returns. But I think there's still there's going to be an opportunity where Keon starts at the 1, starts at the 2, maybe someone else slides to the 3. They started Cam Johnson at the 4 earlier this week. I think Keon Johnson's going to be locked into 30 minutes per game for the Nets moving forward, and he should certainly be more or higher rostered than 22% on Yahoo Leagues.
Yeah, I think the main thing is this recent stretch is not just hot shooting. I mean, it's 15 shot attempts per game over the past 7. So he's getting the volume, he's getting to the free throw line, he's taking threes. Everything you mentioned, he's having a great stretch.
And we've got Darby asked the question, Keon Johnson over D'Lo, and the answer is yes, just because D'Lo doesn't, his playing time's too inconsistent. I think he played like 14 minutes in the most recent game for the Nets. You just don't know what's going to happen. This team's going to be in full tank mode eventually, and guys like D'Lo are unlikely to see the court during that stretch.
All right, Shannon. I got Dalton Knecht as a waiver wire ad, 28% now, a new member of the Charlotte Hornets. I would also keep an eye on Elfrid Payton, who we talked about, signed a 10-day with Charlotte. If you're in a deep league, like a 16-team daily league, I would think about it just to see what happens if you have the free spot. But my main suggestion here, Dalton Knecht. We'll see what happens with the resting down the stretch and for LaMelo and Miles Bridges, because Charlotte's 12-36 right now. You think they want to tank this out, but no matter what, I mean, even if LaMelo and Miles Bridges are playing, I think Knecht now profiles as the team's 3rd best offensive option. And there could be plenty of nights when LaMelo or Bridges sit where he's the number 2 or even like go-to scoring option on the Charlotte Hornets. And it's hard to find a lot of data from his time with the Lakers that makes sense, because he had turned into a play him when he's hot, bench him when he's not type of a guy. So when you're like, oh, I wonder how he did when he took a bunch of shot attempts, or I wonder how he played when he played a bunch of minutes, it's all like he shot 50% from 3 because he was cooking and they just kept playing him. But ultimately, I think he's going to be launching shots and hopefully getting a little more involved passing the ball. But he should have some more ceiling games, some more pop games on the Charlotte team than he had with the Lakers.
Yeah, I think with 10-team leagues, it might not be deep enough to keep him stashed. But 12 and 14-team leagues, I certainly would recommend doing so. My recommendation from trade deadline fallout is Moussa Diabate. I know a lot of folks, you saw Mark Williams get traded, and Diabate was the obvious pivot in Charlotte. And then surprisingly, Charlotte went out and acquired Nurkic yesterday. I'm not high on Nurkic. I do not believe that he is going to be gifted an automatic starting role or a 30-minute per game role with the Charlotte Hornets. I think he's somewhat washed from a fantasy perspective. I certainly believe that. This season, on a per game basis, he's not ranked in the top 200. Under 24 minutes, 8.6 points, 9.2 rebounds, only 0.6 blocks per game. The shooting has not been nearly as good, 45%. This is a guy who often would top 50% earlier in his career, under 70% from the free throw line. I don't believe in Nurkic, and I would go with Diabate. If I'm picking one of the two, I side with Diabate just because I think for a team that's going to be tanking, they're going to want to run out their young guys, give them some more playing time down the stretch. And Diabate can be an impact player on the rebounding category specifically. He is a monster rebounder, monster offensive rebounder as well. You're not going to have many scoring. I mean, he's the type of guy who's going to have a 2-point, 12 rebound game, but there's upside in the defensive categories in addition to the rebounds. So give me Diabate. If you're in a deep enough league and you have big need at center, you've got room on your bench, stash both of them, see how it plays out. But Diabate, I favor him in that battle for playing time.
I think something worth noting about Diabate is the team has trusted him to play 30 minutes before. This is not a guy like as much as we love him, Jalen Smith, who basically never touched 30 minutes. Diabate has played at least 30 minutes in 7 games this year. You mentioned his rebounding. I know specifically offensive rebounding does not count for fantasy unless you're playing in like a 15 cat league. But were he qualified for the minutes qualification, he would have the highest offensive rebounding rate in the entire NBA, slightly higher than Walker Kessler. So someone who's just, he knows his role, is not going to tank your field goal percentage or help it one specific way. But yeah, Diabate is the man. All right, my long shot this week, Karlo Matkovic of the New Orleans Pelicans, a guy who early in the draft process, we thought maybe this guy will become something. And then he just did basically nothing. Even when the Pelicans were dealing with injuries, which was pretty unencouraging. But now he's back in the rotation. And the past 3 games for Matkovic, 7.3 points. He's hitting a 3 per game in this past 3. 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 stocks in 25 minutes. So he's giving you a nice smattering of stats here. And that translates to 25 fantasy points per game during this 3-game stretch. And on the season as a whole, 1 fantasy point per minute, which is essentially the threshold that you're looking for. I'm not too worried about the addition of Olynyk. The Pelicans traded Brandon Ingram, got back Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk. Given this team's place in the standings, I do not necessarily believe that Kelly Olynyk is going to be a priority for them. The Pelicans are in last place in the Western Conference right now at 12-39, below the Utah Jazz. They are also one of the 8 teams that plays 3 times this upcoming week. So I think it's a good chance right now to take a chance on Matkovic. And if he continues playing, you get 3 games out of him. Even if he doesn't see as many minutes, you still get some volume. So someone I would certainly look into.
Yeah, I agree. Given the Pelicans spot in the standings, yeah, Olynyk and Bruce Brown, they wanted the first round pick from Toronto. They didn't care what, if the contracts didn't matter. Yeah, Karlo, that'd be great for some of my best ball teams that are probably far out of the running, where he was my last round dart. My long shot of the week is a guy who was not involved in any trades, but his team did send off a couple pieces that should open up more playing time. Gigi Jackson, forward for the Memphis Grizzlies, 5% rostered on Yahoo, 1% on ESPN. He didn't make his season debut until January 20th. He was recovering from a broken right foot that was sustained in August. Since then, Jackson has appeared in 9 consecutive games, all off the bench for the Grizzlies. And he started to flash some of that upside that we saw from him during his rookie season last year. Big score. He had a few just gigantic scoring games last year. The Grizzlies, yeah. And apologies. Jackson's averaged 22 points, 5 rebounds, 2.5 threes, 1.5 steals, and 25 minutes per game over the past 2 contests. The Grizzlies just traded away Marcus Smart and RotoWire podcast favorite Jake LaRavia before the deadline, and they didn't bring in any notable additions. They essentially gave those contracts away, and that's going to open up playing time for Jackson off the bench. Unless there's an injury in Memphis, I don't think Jackson will make his way into the starting lineup anytime soon. But LaRavia had a pretty decent role off the bench. Smart in the very limited amount of time where he did play this year was playing significant minutes for his team. And I think Jackson's going to benefit from that more than anyone else on the Grizzlies roster.
Yeah, the Grizzlies had a very their bench is just a lot of shifting going around in their bench around this deadline. You mentioned Smart no longer on the team, as well as LaRavia. They got Vince Williams back. I think a lot of people just forgot Vince Williams existed. Someone I've been hanging on to in our keeper league for probably far too long, but hopefully he can do something. But yeah, Jackson, we know what he does. That man scores. He's a microwave scoring forward. That's what he was billed as coming out of South Carolina. He fell to the second round. I can't remember exactly why, but he was a really inefficient guy. Long story short, he did have a good rookie season, and I think they will continue to lean on him as a bench microwave guy. 5% rostered, 1% rostered is just it's pretty low given his if you need points. So that will do it for us for the waiver wire portion of the show. Before we move on to our Friday DFS picks, we do have a word from Edge Boost. Have you ever had your debit card declined or had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? Edge Boost is the first consumer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are numerous benefits to using Edge Boost. $250,000 per day in debit deposits with unlimited withdrawals, cash back on sports betting, DFS, and sweeps, 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation for discretion and responsible gaming. Compatible today for prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick and mortar, casinos, horse racing, and sweeps. No transaction reviews or account freezes. Visit edgeboost.bet today and use promo code ROTOPOD. That's promo code ROTOPOD. All right, Shannon, it is time for our Friday DFS segment. In terms of games today, we have the highest over-under, which is Milwaukee at Atlanta, 243. This game is up to. We didn't really talk about Atlanta's or Milwaukee's deadline moves. Kind of unclear right now whether Kuzma, whether LeVert, whether Terrence Mann, Kevin Porter will be available for either of these teams. But is this a game that you're targeting today?
Somewhat. I'm definitely interested in it. If Giannis plays, he would be a very good option to build your team around. I think he would have a gigantic game against Atlanta, but because of essentially my template that I'm building off of right now, I avoided this game on purpose because I want to see what the hell these lineups look like before I commit to any players in my lineup. But I do think there are decent values on both sides. Dyson Daniels has been an absolute heater since Jalen Johnson went down. He's basically a walking 40 fantasy points in DFS. Risa Shares had a couple good games, and he's still discounted enough where it might make sense to play him. Okongwu's been a beast. I do have him in my lineups. And then on the Milwaukee side, I need to see what's going to happen with, is Kuzma starting? My guess is no, not initially. But what are your feelings on that? Does Kuzma get handed a starting gig for Milwaukee?
I think he'll come off the bench initially, but he doesn't really like Torian Prince and Kyle Kuzma are not shooting guards. Just from like a size and functional lineup perspective, I think they'll continue starting Andre Jackson, but whether or not Prince gets swapped out for Kuzma, kind of unclear.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, for some other games that I like and other targets, I mean, we mentioned Keon Johnson earlier. He has like 4 straight games with over 30 fantasy points. He's topped. He's playing 30 minutes every game now. He's still only $5,000 on DraftKings. Like him quite a bit. And then a game that I feel like I should possibly not be targeting, but it's just impossible for me to get away from is the Washington Cleveland game. And it is the Washington side that I know I'm going to hit pretty heavily. You've got Keyshawn George, Koulibaly, Carrington, All of those guys are supremely discounted. Even Rashawn Holmes, who will probably get his second consecutive start at center, they're all very, very affordable and easily. You could easily plug them into your lineups. I mean, Keyshawn George and Carrington in particular, 3,800 for Keyshawn, and for Bub, he is at 3,300. And he just started the most recent game for the Wizards, had Carrington, that is, and had over 40 fantasy points. Super risky, but the blowout doesn't matter for these names. Like Keyshawn George and Carrington are going to play. They're going to very likely will both be in the starting lineup for Washington, and very likely will play 30 plus minutes, even if they're losing by 40 points.
Yeah, blowout proof guys, always good for DFS. You think about like Peyton Pritchard in Boston, it's going to play no matter what. Ty Jerome is going to play no matter what in Cleveland. Yeah, I think that game is hard to avoid. I agree. I will mention, I know I've promoted it before, but RotoWire.com/pod. With the free look behind the paywall, you get a free look at our RotoWire DFS optimizer for NBA. I start every time I make a DFS lineup. First thing I do is go right to the optimizer, and I build my lineups off of there. And I will say it's not. This is about as customizable as an optimizer as you can get. You can customize how many, if you don't want more than 2 players from one team, if you don't want players who are injured, if you can build multiple lineups. So you want 10 lineups. Oh, I don't want one guy in more than 40% of my 10 lineups. You could even change our projections if you'd like. If you're like, oh, we have Trae Young projected for 56. I actually think against Milwaukee, he could go for 65. You could do that for everyone. And then we'll spit you out the projections that you like. We have variance. You could go 20% variance if you want some ceiling and floor stuff. So I if you have not used it before, again, free trial, rotowire.com/try. De'Aaron Fox in his second game with the Spurs going up against the Charlotte Hornets. That game we'll kind of have to see because LaMelo Ball is questionable. We're not sure if Knecht or Nurkic will make their debuts. We do have the Pistons on the slate, Shannon, going up against the Philadelphia 76ers too.
Yeah, we do. It's the Pistons. Cade's become quite a bit too expensive. He's been very, very solid, but on DraftKings in particular, I'm not going to pony up the salary for him. Jalen Duren's decent value. Asar Thompson is actually starting to flash some of his upside. His minutes have been creeping up pretty quietly. He got up to 27 minutes in the most recent game. It's just solid to see his role grow a little bit. Over the past 3 games, he's averaging just north of 30 fantasy points per, and he's right around 4,500 on DraftKings. So a solid value, even with Tobias Harris being probable for tonight's game. On the Philly side, though, it'd be interesting. I know I've got Yabusele. He's currently questionable. That might be an opportunity where we do see Grimes get inserted into the starting lineup. Yabusele has to sit because they could slide George over to the 4 and go with an undersized lineup. But instead of going with like a Cade, I love Maxey as one of my expensive players tonight against the Pistons. Maxey's a beast, even with Embiid and George expected to play tonight. It's just hard to ignore what Maxey has done in recent games. He is averaging 53 fantasy points over his past 6. That's 35.5 points, 7.2 rebounds, 1.7 steals, just 3.7 3-pointers per game, just totally dominating. This is the Maxey we have all expected when picking him, in a second or third round this past year. It's hard for me to avoid Maxey in tonight's DFS slate.
You didn't talk any Raptors Thunder, did you?
Not yet.
Okay. Because this game, first of all, the Thunder are 19-point favorites at home. That might be the highest spread of the season. I don't have it in front of me. My guess is that's the highest spread of the season. But for Toronto, RJ Barrett, and Jakob Pertl are out, and obviously Ingram is not ready to make his debut. So I think we're gonna get some increased minutes from like John Mobo and Ochai Agbaji. I will say Agbaji is kind of interesting to me. On DraftKings, he's 3,300, so you can fit him pretty much in any lineup. And has had some decent games lately, and I think we'll just play regardless of the outcome of this game. Like the Raptors could lose this game by 35, and I think Agbaji could still play 30 minutes. This game could also be close, and then Agbaji would play 30 minutes, like we were talking about with guys whose minutes are pretty stable. His past 5 games, he's averaging 24 fantasy points a game. So I think this is a game I would think about maybe for some low priced guys. Honestly, on either side who could get extra run on a blowout.
Yeah, Agbaji most likely will come off the bench. Jacoby Walter has started the past 2 games for the Raptors. I would expect the same tonight. I'm very curious to see what Toronto does at the center position. I mean, is again be a Mobo guy, a Mobo that gets the starting nod like he did a couple times earlier this season? Are they going to go with? Did they cut Orlando? Oh no, I think Orlando Robinson's contract expired today. So if you set your DFS lineups last night and went with Orlando Robinson, his contract expired this morning, and he's not currently on the Raptors, but we'll see. They might be able to sign him to another 10-day contract.
That's true.
Yeah.
They might actually.
Wow. Yeah, I'll certainly be interested to see what Toronto does with that center position, especially if Robinson's not there. So Mobo's a guy that could certainly get extra run. But really, this game, I'm avoiding the Thunder players. I mean, Chet Holmgren looks like he's going to make his return.
The lead,
yeah, we really did bury the lead there. He's off the injury report. It was a surprise yesterday to see he was off the injury report, and it appears he'll be active for tonight's game against Toronto. But when you're looking at the spread, Holmgren coming back, I highly doubt anyone from OKC, plays more than 30 minutes. SGA, Holmgren's definitely not playing a heavy workload, but Hartenstein, Williams, SGA, those guys are only going to play like 27 minutes tonight, and they'll still have productive lines in those 27 minutes, but
right.
I am not going to play them. And even on Toronto's side, let's say Toronto keeps it closer than what it's projected to be. Scotty Barnes is in a good spot with Pertl out, RJ Barrett out, Ingram's not ready to return yet. So Barnes is gonna have to shoulder the load, but he's gonna have Jalen Williams guarding him the whole time, and that dude's a damn demon. So it's hard for me to cough up the necessary salary to slot Barnes in my lineup for tonight. So it is a game I'm mostly avoiding, depending on what Toronto does at the center position.
I don't have much else, Shannon. Do you have any more DFS takes you want to fire off before we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, I mean, my take on Diabate might be totally wrong 2 weeks from now, but tonight it's going to be right, because there's no way Nurkic is playing tonight for the Hornets. So Diabate, he might not even start. They'll probably start Taj Gibson again, like they did a couple times when Mark Williams sat in the past couple weeks. But Diabate will play close to 30 minutes, and he will grab double-digit rebounds, 4,300. I like him as a nice value play on DraftKings. That's it.
That will wrap it up for us, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Thank you to Edge Boost. As a reminder, rotowire.com/pod for the free look behind the paywall. You can get all the DFS tools and the optimizer that Shannon and I like to use. If you want some Super Bowl content, obviously that's available. If you are interested in baseball season, we have a bunch of really great paywalled baseball content. So check that out. That will do it for us this week. Hope everybody enjoyed the trade deadline.